We're very happy to have with us Missouri Senator Roy Blunt. Senator, thanks for joining us on AgriTalk.
Mike, it's good to be with you again. Good to be at this Missouri Farm Bureau event and be on AgriTalk with you for another year.
Before we get into budgets, I want to talk about something that you have introduced, and that is you're trying to protect consumers and what we would call essential services, public safety, if you will, from sequestration cuts. Tell us about your proposal here.
Well, first of all, let me say that I think these spending caps are the right thing to do, and maintaining the caps are the right thing to do. The better way to do them would be to let the appropriations process work and appropriate money that's below the cap. Then you don't have this whole idea of line-by-line cutting. But if we're going to have the sequestration, if the only way we can achieve this goal is that way, I'm not opposed to doing it. It's not the best way to do it, but cutting spending is the best thing to do. But the essential services, the people that would show up on a bad weather day, the people that would show up, and in fact the amendment that I've introduced to the continuing resolution and the Ag bill and some other updated appropriations bills that are in that resolution would just basically use the same standard that the Obama administration set in 2011, April of 2011, or the Clinton administration set in 1995 when we were either had a government shutdown or concerned that we would have, and say these people that are essential to safety and the protection of property and life have to show up. And of course, the things that are inspected by the FDA, which is another area under the appropriations bill that Senator Pryor and I have, they can show up periodically, and all of those places can still work. But as you well know, for meat, poultry, eggs, that federal inspector has to be there every minute the facility's open. And so if the federal inspector doesn't show up, nobody else that works there gets to show up. So the livelihood of those people who work at hard jobs are impacted. And of course the supply of, again, meat, eggs, and poultry for everybody else is impacted, and it's impacted pretty quickly. I just talked to some people in the poultry industry today, and they say, they really have to decide next month when they set the eggs how many chickens they're going to be able to process through their facilities in July, August, September. And so it's not just impacting work that happens at those facilities, but it happens as soon as farm families begin to get the chickens that they contract for, and obviously are impacted by how many chickens they produce, and that's impacted by how many can be processed.
Secretary Vilsack is preparing for furloughs of those meat inspectors. We're hearing members of Congress, your colleague, Senator Joe Hans, we've heard Chairman Lucas say he didn't come and ask us for flexibility. He's pursuing a kind of a draconian procedure here rather than ask for flexibility to work around this. How do you respond to that?
Every indication so far is that the administration's decided that they want any reduction in federal spending to be as painful as it can possibly be. And so I wrote Secretary Vilsack a letter on this. He wrote back and said, well, under the sequestration rules, we don't have the authority we would have under a government shutdown, so I'm going to try to give him the authority. The president decided to cut the self-guided tours at the White House. Now, how many people could possibly be involved in the self-guided tours at the White House? Not that many. I think this is not working out for the administration quite like they thought it would. People are saying, well, now wait a minute, why are you cutting this instead of that? Why are you sequestering this instead of that? And that's actually probably a pretty good fight for those of us who think the government's spending too much money to have. I put a letter in the Congressional Record, Mike, just the other day where the Office of Management and Budget sent everybody in the federal government a letter, guidance in July and again in 28th of September that said spend your money for the budget year that begins October 1 as if the Congress will change the law. Spend your money as if these budget caps will never have any impact. And so you get down now to halfway through the spending year, and things that would have frankly been manageable if you'd have worked on them over a whole year. When it looks like you're going to have less money as a farm family coming in than you'd hope you might have, you begin to plan for that when the rain doesn't show up. You begin to plan for that when you don't get your crop out the time you normally would have expected to. The administration told federal agencies to act as if the law would not be enforced. And so now you get halfway through the budget year, instead of a 5% reduction, in some places you're having to take a 20% reduction for the months that you actually have to deal with here at the very end of this spending year. But we want to get these food safety inspectors to work so that everybody else can work. I think in Missouri we have 148 meat processing facilities. I really don't have a good number on how many people work there, but it I'm sure is in the 30,000 range, give or take a few workers. So 30,000 people can't work on the day collectively don't work on the day that the USDA inspector decides not to show up.
Talking to Missouri Senator Roy Blunt. All right, the budgets. We have Paul Ryan's budget. We are expecting one from the Senate, from the Democratic leadership. I guess next month we get one from the White House. First of all, what are your thoughts on what we have seen out of the House and what you expect will come out of the Senate?
Well, I think they'll be very different, and the budget is always sort of the responsibility of the majority to pass a budget that the majority is for, and so you're going to have a House-passed budget. Because the idea that I co-sponsored in the last Congress was finally voted into law. If there's no budget passed by your House of the Congress, you don't get paid. We voted on that in January. And now you're going to have a Senate-passed budget. But frankly, they're going to be dramatically different. There are two dramatically different views of the spending future of the country. And they won't agree on a budget. So there'll be no agreed-to budget. But going through this process matters. One, it matters because the law says you have to do it. But it's been 4 years since the Senate passed a budget. Anybody in this room or listening who has an iPad or knows somebody who has an iPad, which would be 100% of everybody, nobody had an iPad the last time the Senate passed a budget because the iPad hadn't been invented yet the last time the Senate passed a budget. And, my dad had and still has a saying that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Well, we've been failing to plan, and we've actually been succeeding and then planning to fail by not.
How can that be? I mean, basically, the Senate, you're breaking the law, aren't you, by not having a budget?
You are not. You are breaking the law, and for every year since the Budget Act passed in the early 1970s until 2010, both houses of the Congress had always passed a budget. From 1974 or so till 2010. But frankly, in 2010, both the House and the Senate, Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House, Harry Reid was the leader of the Senate, they decided, hey, it's really not to our advantage to tell people what we're for. And so neither passed a budget that time. 2011, Republicans took control of the House again and have passed a budget in 2011, 12, and clearly will in 13. And now the Senate joins it. Even a bigger issue, though, is that we not only haven't passed a budget, we haven't debated the appropriations bills in the Senate. I've only been in the Senate a couple of years, but the Senate hasn't gone through the regular process in a complete sense for about 6 years now. And so many of these agencies that are taking the line-by-line cuts that we also call sequester are taking line-by-line cuts on things that were their priorities 4 and 5 years ago. Every leader in the military I've talked to, I'm also on the Armed Services Committee, every leader in the military I've talked to, and they'll say this in a public hearing. This is not some secret. They say, look, sequestration's a problem, but the continuing resolution is a problem, is equally a problem. Some of them say it's a bigger problem, because it's been years since we've updated our military spending priorities to what the real needs are today. And so one of the things we're doing this week is we're doing that. We're doing it for the military. We're doing it for agriculture. We're doing it for commerce, science, justice. We're doing it for homeland security. That still means about half of the departments are left out, but about 70% of the money will be updated whenever we get our work done this week. And hopefully, in addition to updating the work, we can do things like solve this food safety inspector problem.
All right, that's Missouri Senator Roy Blunt. We're here in Washington, D.C., and again, waiting to see what that Senate proposal will be for the budget. We have the House proposal, the White House waiting till next month, and we'll see how all that plays out. Already, we know it's going to impact agriculture. We're going to get into that tomorrow with the House Ag Committee leadership and how they view that. We're going to take a break, our final break. When we come back here to Washington, D.C., Senator Blunt has agreed to stay with us a little bit longer, and then Missouri Farm Bureau President Blake Hurst is going to join us as well. We can talk about some of the issues of most concern to members of the Missouri Farm Bureau here. It's been interesting. There's been a lot of discussion in this group. We had an exercise last night with Bob Young, economist from the American Farm Bureau Federation, and we had a chance, if we were in control of the budget, we had a chance to make cuts and see what we would do with the deficit. We did a little better, but we still left a lot out there on the table, so it shows how big the problem is, right. And it's just not as easy as we would like to think it might be to make it go away, so it's going to take a lot of hard work. We'll take a break, come back with more from Washington, D.C. on AgriTalk. Welcome back to AgriTalk in Washington, D.C. with the Missouri Farm Bureau Ag Leaders of Tomorrow group. I'm joined by Blake Hurst, Missouri Farm Bureau President, and still with us, very happy to have Missouri Senator Roy Blunt. Senator, you talked during the break, we were talking about a couple of things to watch. You got some things that are being worked on as far as biocrop protection. Tell us about that.
Well, there are a handful of things in this ag bill that will be added to the continuing resolution that gets us through the end of October or the end of September that are really helpful. One is that if you plant a biocrop that's legal to plant when you plant it, you get to harvest it and sell it. We've had some court decisions in alfalfa and sugar beets and other things where people have planted a crop and then there's some kind of lawsuit, some kind of challenge by environmental groups or other groups, and the court says, well, you can't harvest that crop, you can't sell that crop. This doesn't say that a court couldn't say in the future there's something still to be looked at, but it does say if you plant a crop that's you're legally able to plant, you get to harvest it and you get to sell it. And then another big regulatory issue was the GIPSA issue, I think that we are largely not allowing that to be implemented because none of the money can be spent to implement it. So those things, and ag research, there's a continued commitment to ag research, which everybody understands needs to be done at a level where people benefit from it in a broad-based way and sharing the input of that ag research in a broad-based way.
Let me ask you about an issue that's terribly divisive in the country, critically important to agriculture from a labor standpoint, and that is the immigration issue. Farm Bureau and others have pushed, for a better guest worker program. What do you think we will see along the lines of immigration reform?
I think it's hard to get immigration reform until you get people are convinced that the border is under operational control. Not that nobody could get across the border, but that we no longer have people able to come across the border in pretty much because they want to and they're willing to repeatedly try until they get across. There are really sort of three questions with immigration, Mike, and one is controlling the border. Two is what are the legitimate workforce needs of the country, and three is what do you do with people who came here without legal documents, or about half the people here just simply stayed beyond the time their documents let them stay. But in two areas on the workforce front, one is seasonal workers and another is highly skilled workers. And that's in that criteria of what are the real workforce needs of the country. And, frankly, anybody that, for instance, comes here and gets a graduate degree in one of our institutions and wants to stay, I'm inclined to figure out how to let them stay because we need all of that kind of vigor in our workforce we can have. And then I have sponsored, when I was a member of the House, the legislation to try to expand the number that could come in under the seasonal worker program. It's a come-and-go program that works exactly like you would want it to for every country involved. People come here, they do jobs for short periods of time. In agriculture and tourism would be the two big areas that most American workers want a job that's not seasonal. And so they do those seasonal, and they have to go home. And if you don't go home, you don't get to come back. And so that fits, and frankly, the country you're coming in from to do that part-time job that creates more money for your family than you could have working full-time in your home country benefits if you can safely go home and know that you have an opportunity to come back and do that seasonal job again. So we need to deal with that. At some point, though, fundamental to all that is how much control we have on the future problem of people coming across the border that aren't legally doing that. And I think this is something the government can achieve both at the border itself and at the workplace where, frankly, the 1930 technology Social Security card is probably not good enough anymore as the entryway into the workplace. And you can't really punish people for hiring workers who aren't legally here if you don't give them some tool that really works. And the background check, the tool we have now on workers, really is not all that reliable. The tool where you call in and check a Social Security number and it just doesn't work a lot of the time.
Turn now to Missouri Farm Bureau President Blake Hurst. And Blake, I know you appreciate the time Senator Blunt is giving your group. And tell us about the value that you see for your members to come to Washington, D.C. and talk to your members of Congress like this.
Well, we've got about 83 people here, and we're joined today by 25 A-lot participants. We think there's a tremendous amount of value and sort of a two-way street here. We get a chance to perhaps educate our members. But more importantly, tomorrow we're spending time with Senator Blunt today. Tomorrow we'll have a breakfast up on the Hill with our congressional delegation, and our members will get to talk directly with them about things that are important to them. So that's the highlight of the trip, and that's why it's so valuable.
Some of the issues we've already talked about. What other issues will your members be wanting to bring up here?
Well, we'll talk about Farm Bill, of course. We're concerned about the failure to pass it. We have some ideas about what would be a good direction to go in the future. We'll be talking about that. I guess the overriding concern of our members once you get past farm legislation is the budget and the increased debt, the increasing deficit. So that's a concern of our members as well.
Let me ask the Senator. We're hearing from farm groups that they are not hearing a great outcry from the countryside about lack of a farm bill. Members of Congress, they say, have not hearing of an outcry. Why don't we have a farm bill? Why aren't we getting this done? Are you hearing from constituents saying, you got to get this farm bill done? What's going on here? Are you getting any pressure from back home on that?
Well, Blake Hurst would be the guy that would be at the tip of that spear.
Maybe he brought the pressure with him.
He may have brought the pressure with him. I do think that, the farm economy there's certainly pockets of challenge. Dairy would be one of them, but the farm economy is pretty good right now, and that helps some alleviate the concern. But it's not always going to be good in all likelihood. And everybody, what I hear most often is farmers want to know that they can have some long-term reliability. A 5-year farm bill, in my view, is better than a three-year farm bill. 3-year, I guess, would be better than a 1-year. But we ought to create as much certainty for farm families and agriculture decisions as we can. All right, we have to wrap it up. Our thanks to Senator Roy Blunt and Missouri Farm Bureau President Blake Hurst, and for all of you for joining us on our broadcast today from our nation's capital on AgriTalk.